Weirding Way Media.
Welcome to episode 95 of the Filmumentaries podcast. This is Jamie Benning speaking to you from a cold and windy, very windy England. I hope you enjoyed episode 94, my conversation with legendary producer Robert Watts. That was such a good afternoon we spent with him. I saw him again a couple of years later and he remembered our chat and lit up and he said, "And yes, you bought me that wonderful Formula One cap and signed autograph. I was so grateful." It was so nice to see him again. Thank you for joining me again, or perhaps for the first time. If you like what you hear in this podcast, please consider contributing $12 or your currency equivalent to support an entire year of episodes. That's at least 24 episodes because, as regular listeners know, I do have bonus episodes from time to time. So that's about 50 cents per episode, and I'd say that was pretty good value. You can do that at patreon.com/Jamie Benning. There are several tiers to choose from with different perks, like early video versions of the podcast, if available. It depends on the interviewee. Please take a moment to check it out, and I'll leave a link in the show notes so it's just a click away for you. Okay, this is another one from the archives, but as with the Robert Watts recording, I've been wanting to put this out in podcast form for a while too. This is a conversation I had with actor Garrick Hagon back in 2015. Yeah, it was 2015. If that name doesn't ring a bell, how about Biggs Darklighter? Yes, Garrick is well known for his mostly deleted scenes from Star Wars in which he plays Luke's best pal. I met Garrick in the green room at a Star Wars Trilogy screening at the BFI Southbank earlier that year. I'd been invited there by my old mate Toby Phlipott, Jabba puppeteer and all-round good guy. Garrick and I got chatting about how I'd done an interview with Toby already and created what turned out to be a very popular video from it, so I suggested we do the same. In fact, both of those videos are still available on my Vimeo channel. That's Inside Jabba, and Blast It Biggs, Where Are You is the other one. And I'll also link to those in the show notes. However, as with all interviews, when you're making a video, you often cut out certain bits that you don't need. You might go off on tangents that aren't relevant to the video you're making. But with a podcast, you can make it a more long-form conversation. So that's what I've done here. The interview was done over the phone, so it won't sound as good as some of the more recent episodes, but it's still very listenable, and I have done a bit of audio magic on it. So here's my interview with actor, voiceover artist, audiobook reader and businessman, Garrick Hagon, and I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on. So, can you tell me how you got involved working on Star Wars in the first place?
Well, Star Wars was one of the films that came along in my early career, dare I say, that I went up for as an actor. So I got involved with Star Wars like most of the actors, American and Canadian actors in London at the time. The young ones, or youngish ones, were called in to audition, and at that time, we knew nothing about it, and the casting director, Irene Lamb, knew us from work that we'd done, myself in films and television, and most of the others in the same way. So we all trooped in, and I think all I was told was that I had to do most of the talking, which, because probably Mr. Lucas wouldn't say very much. And that, I think, was the case until we got talking about a film that I'd done in Morocco in the desert. So it had some relevance, I think, to what George was going to do in Tunisia. Or maybe he had already been there checking out locations. So it was a very run-of-the-mill procedure going for an audition. I remember sitting in a cafe in Soho Square thinking, oh, well, I'm going up for some film. It's called, I don't even know whether we knew the title. Maybe we knew it's called The Star Wars. And I went along and met him, and apparently he was marking us, unbeknownst to the actors, he was marking us on rather like a report card. And I think I must have had a fairly high mark. Maybe Irene Lamb told me eventually that it was 7, but who knows? Whatever it was an audition, like many other auditions. You meet the director, and we didn't read, and I must have talked enough to be marked as number 7. From then on in, it was just a question of getting the contract and getting the script, and it all started.
So obviously when you first ended up seeing a script, you must have been delighted to see that you had, a big part in the film. You were one of the main protagonists.
Yes, it was a good part. And when I first got the script, it was as puzzling to me as it was to many of the actors, really not being acquainted with the characters, not really knowing what these robots meant. And actually, I wasn't that familiar with science fiction, fantasy, whatever, myself at the time. So I was doing a classical play. I was doing something on television called The Lady of the Camellias. So it was quite different. And I'd done a lot of classic theater, so the script was quite new and different to me. And perhaps I knew I had a fairly good part, but I didn't realize how close I was to Luke, or how kind of much part of the family, of the original family I was, until I met Mark in the wardrobe some weeks later. And then he said, oh, you've got the best part. You're my best friend. You got the best part. You die. And I thought, well, that's maybe questionable. On the other hand, it was great. We right immediately, we hugged each other and realized that, we're going to be a friendship on this picture. It was then, I suppose, Biggs kind of came into focus.
Mm. And you got on well with Mark, and you found him, good to work with. He always comes across as a very enthusiastic young man back then, and even now he's an enthusiastic older guy. But how did you find him back then?
Yeah, just the same. He's wonderful, giving and intelligent and quick. And I right away felt, kind of a warm relationship, like I said. And on the set, I was amazed at how much of a company leader he was, even at that age, in a way, welcoming us right away when we arrived in Tunisia, which was our first location, coming into the hotel. I remember him coming up to our car. And I suppose Anthony and Koo and I were together, and it was very welcoming. And from that on in, it was a friendly and kind of fun relationship. He was out of television, but he was incredibly quick and adept at film, and he was a good kind of guide as to the spirit of the film. I think I thought he was an amazing young leading player. I'm sure he didn't feel that he was a leading player, but at that time, but he was.
That's great. I guess coming from the soaps and things like that, where it is quite a close-knit family, if you like, because they're in each other's pockets, he's used to that, fostering that environment, maybe. It's interesting.
I'm sure that had an influence. And he certainly knew his way around the film archive, if you like. He'd watched a lot of films, being I think a lad in a military family, and perhaps on his own, being able to watch a hell of a lot while in a different environment, so that he knew film very well. He was very knowledgeable. And what the amazing thing is that when the interviews I've seen in the short times I've met him at conventions since, he remains equally energetic and enthusiastic and friendly.
Mm. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, he does. So you all flew out to Tunisia to start the filming. You all flew on the same plane, is that right? Yeah.
We did. We all met each other at that time, and right from then on, it was like a little foreign adventure. I'd been in Libya extensively, which is right next door, and or Morocco, and then Libya. And so I knew a little bit of the Arab milieu, and I knew quite a bit of Arabic, indeed. And I was looking forward to putting it to use again. And I don't think Tony, Anthony Forrest, or Koo had been there, but it was all a hell of an adventure. Koo was young, and I think she'd had quite a life up to then, but she was still very, very young. So we were very excited. I think we had quite a few days when we didn't appear on the set, so we had a few days to fool around in Jabba, which is where they put us before we traveled out to the set, where we stayed in the hotel in Jabba. And it was on the beach, and there were facilities around to, well, in our case, to go horseback riding, which we took advantage of, but maybe it wasn't a smart idea. I don't imagine the film company would have liked that.
I do like the image of, Luke Skywalker, Biggs Darklighter, and a stormtrooper on horseback riding through the desert. It's something.
Well, I think it was more or less along the beach, because we were still in the Jabba area, but it was a hell of a ride. We did have one, and we just let the horses go. That was terribly dangerous, and I think we would have been penalized by Robert Watts or the company, and it would have been terrible if anything had happened to Mark or any of us, indeed. But fortunately, we stayed on our horses. I'd been riding for a long time in the previous film in North Africa, and so I was up for it. I'm not sure how much Anthony had done or Mark. Anyway, thank God we all emerged and were able to film in this next day or two after that.
What a great adventure. I mean, just the filming alone, what a great adventure. But being in a place, you were familiar with it, but as you say, the others not so familiar. What a great adventure it must have been. Sounds fantastic.
Well, it was. It was all very exciting and new. I mean, of course, you were surrounded by the models and bits and pieces of the set. But it's always an adventure going on a film set anyway, because you have a lot of new people to meet, the crew and the cast that you haven't met before. And it's always a bit apprehensive. Sure, you're nervous because you're setting out on something where you don't know what will happen. You hope you're in control, but you never know.
Yeah, I can imagine. Some of your longer scenes were cut from the movie. I remember being a kid, looking through the storybook, and there'd be photos of you in there, and I think, hang on, I didn't see that in the film. So I think, in that sense, despite the fact that the biggest part of your role was deleted, as it were, I think you've always been a fan favorite, because there's an intrigue to the character as well. You want to know more. You want to know more about the relationship between Luke and Biggs and how that developed. And it's nice to see that there's with the deleted scenes in, if you've seen that, people have edited them back in and things occasionally. If you look at it, there's a real sort of arc to your character, and I think that's probably why you've remained one of the fan favorites. What do you think about that?
Well, sure, there's a lot in that scene that explains why Mark leaves the farm and goes off to the rebels, and there's a lot just in terms of character, in terms of the relationship of Mark with the gang at Anchorhead, and to miss that is a gap to me, and to a lot of people, a lot of the fans who meet me at conventions, regret that the scene and that backstory is not there. And there is an intrigue about a deleted scene, because they feel they're finding something that perhaps other people haven't found. And certainly, in terms of my exposure in the film, it would have been nice to have it there. And it's just as I'm very pleased that there have been releases of the deleted scene. It's a 4-minute scene that was all or nothing, really. I think it would have been very hard to cut. And also, I don't think there were many opportunities in the scene itself. When the camera left, I think that we did it in 2 phases, and I think it would have been hard to cut it anyway. There was too much in there. There was quite a lot of information in there to cut it and put little pieces of the scene back. So all I can say is that I miss it. A lot of people miss it, but that was a decision that was made along the line, and I think Mark misses it too, or did. And I don't know, there was a lot of discussion. There's been a lot of discussion about it over the years.
It feels to me like there's that scene with Luke and Han Solo on the Death Star where they're talking about rescuing the princess, and there's that kind of banter between them. And it's one of the only other scenes, I think, between you and Mark where there is that same kind of banter and that kind of, there's the feeling of genuine friendship there. So I think I think the film is lacking as far as its deletion is concerned.
Yeah, I mean, the old scripts, the early scripts, I think Biggs was either a kid brother or was he part of it? Twins? I can't remember. Some of the early scripts, he was younger than Luke, and there was a varied history throughout the early scripts about Biggs himself and the name Darklighter. But there is what remained in the scene as we shot it was a friendship. That's basically, and the idea that there's kind of like an older brother that guides Mark towards his destiny, if you like, towards joining a rebel force and fighting for something that we both believe in. So there is some political significance, but it's not there on screen. It's in the deleted portion.
So do you remember how sort of felt when you saw the success of Star Wars, and was there obviously a disappointment on your part just not having that big part anymore? And do you think its subsequent release as a deleted scene has had an effect on your career? Is it giving you more exposure again, do you think? Or
no, well, it's certainly people who come to the conventions. No, it hasn't affected me in any other way. I don't think in terms of my work,
because you've gone on to have work in dozens.
Well, my work is never. Yes, my work is not involved anything to do with that in terms of, except obviously just meeting fans around the world. In fact, I've been very lucky and part of the enjoyment is discussing the very things you're asking me. And most people have a question about it and how I felt. Of course, it's disappointment, but I was always involved in my work here and elsewhere, all around. I've never kind of depended on my exposure in Star Wars. I was immediately out of Star Wars. In fact, when I was coming back from Tunisia, I was going straight into a television and so on. It's been, fortunately, a very nice kind of variety of work that I've had while I've been in London and before that in Canada.
I would imagine as well that some of the pleasure comes from the actual process or a lot of the pleasure comes from the actual process of doing it rather than necessarily the end result, perhaps.
Well, absolutely, and the people you meet and the fun you have. And I've had a lot of, first of all, let's say as a direct result of whatever, the interest in Star Wars and the tremendous success and all that has been travel and meeting very good friends around the world. And that's been a great pleasure. The excitement of being able to go to a different country when you're actually working on the film is terrific too. I've done films in China and Africa and Europe, all over Europe and America, and Canada, so that is part of the enjoyment, seeing the countries and just living new experiences.
And were you living in London at the time? Because obviously you then went on to work at Elstree Studios for Star Wars in Boreham Wood. And I think it was the year I was born, actually, 1976. It was the hottest summer on record in the UK. Do you remember anything about that time being there? And were you, as I said, were you living in London at the time?
Yes, of course I was. Yeah, and I mean, it was hot, but I've been in hotter places. Gosh, I was filming in Morocco when it was 120 on the set, that was really hot. In fact, they had us. Makeup was still on camera when they were saying action, and you had to film about 20 seconds before you started to sweat. And so that the heat didn't bother me, although Elstree wasn't terribly air conditioned. I think we all sat outside and then rushed in for the cockpit scenes and sweated within our orange suits. But it was hot, and I suppose it was really hot on the crews who were manning these lights and so on. But as actors, I think Bill Hootkin split his up the back, maybe because of the size. So his was open at the back. But, we're often used to extreme heat or extremely difficult conditions shooting. And then we get a break. I mean, we're not like all day as the crew was. But I remember the pavements cracking, the shortage of, the water kind of bans and so on like that. It was a tough summer. Nothing like working in the desert in Morocco and Libya in that heat.
Yeah. And you worked with Alec Guinness briefly before, is that right?
Well, not briefly. As a child, I had an incredibly momentous start because Canada at that time was opening what became one of the most famous classical theaters in America. And certainly we had Alec Guinness come to Stratford, Ontario, having been asked by Tyrone Guthrie, one of the greatest Shakespearean directors at that time. Guthrie and Guinness and Irene Worth and a wonderful company of Canadian actors who were just really getting used to an apron stage and doing Shakespeare on the world scene, if you like. So it was an incredible lucky break for a kid like myself. I went up to Stratford and there they were, some of the most famous actors in the world. I played the Prince of Wales in Richard III. The first scene I had was a tremendous entrance staged by Tyrone Guthrie with flags dropping at my feet and with drawings, leave me in the center of the stage, and Guinness then kissing my hand. So that was my first encounter with Alec Guinness. Later, I met him on the set in Tunisia, and Anthony Daniels introduced me again, saying, "This is Guy." I said, "Well, I've actually met you before. I was in Richard III at Stratford, and I thought perhaps we might have a conversation about that and how time has gone by." And then all he said was, "Well, that was a long time ago," and he didn't really want to discuss it. So we didn't touch on it, but it was certainly instrumental in a lot of Canadian actors' careers that season at Stratford. And working with Guinness was an incredible experience for all of us.
Yeah.
And the theater became, as I say, one of the most famous Shakespearean theaters in the world.
That's incredible. I know that Mark Hamill's often talked about, being on set with Alec Guinness and saying, he was one of his kind of movie heroes. So he would watch all the Ealing comedies and everything. And I guess maybe being a kid and just being in the presence of somebody that, you've seen on a 30-foot screen, it must have been quite daunting.
Well, actually, yeah, and as a kid, I don't think I would have been taken to any of those.
Right.
So I didn't know this gigantic film presence or this wonderful craftsman, this wonderful actor. So all of that came later. And
it probably freed you up as well.
So it was all. In fact, Alec Guinness, I'd originally gone up to join the company as playing the page. And I think Guinness and Guthrie got together and said it would probably be better if instead of that boy playing the page, he plays the Prince of Wales, and the boy that's playing the Prince of Wales plays the page. So we had to switch around, which was hard on the boy that was playing the Prince of Wales originally. And so I was very lucky, and I think that suggestion might have come from Guinness himself. Whatever it was, however it happened, I was grateful that switch came, and I actually played the Prince of Wales, because it was quite a feather in my cap all the way through school. Everybody was kind of impressed by that. And it helped me in Canada. I mean, it started my career on television and stage and film in Canada. So I thought, I've been lucky.
Yeah.
Basically, I was lucky. I could have, I played the page and never acted again.
It's always the sign of a good actor, I think, downplaying their skill as an actor. So you've been lucky. I mean, luck always is a part of it, but obviously you've got, amazing voice and amazing skills as an actor. And I do always enjoy seeing you in films. I recently watched Spy Game again, which I actually, my then girlfriend was working in the building that they were shooting in London in Senate House. So there's an added significance there. I was visiting her one Saturday morning and, walked into Robert Redford and Brad Pitt shooting this movie. And
really?
Yeah. And
well, that was a wonderful group of people. And I just loved working on that with Tony Scott and Redford too, because we sat around that table. I was the head of the CIA, as you know, and so we had to discuss that scene quite a bit because Robert had kind of, he wanted to present his character in a certain way, and the scene was tricky for him, just the politics of the scene. And so there was a lot of discussion, and we had a lot of chat sitting around this table. I think Tony took a whole day just rehearsing it, talking about it, and he was a very inspiring director. Tony Scott, miss him.
Man, a very sad loss, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Just one other thing about Star Wars, when you first saw the final film. When you first saw the final film, what was your reaction to it? I mean, I think at the time there's also a lot of talk, isn't there, about people saying they were working on some low rate science fiction for TV kind of movie, and they didn't think it was going to amount to anything. Did you feel that sort of on set from the crew? And what was your reaction when you saw the finished film?
Oh well, of course we were bowled over. It just we saw it as a cast and crew showing, I think, on a Saturday. It was absolutely mind blowing, and at that time it was admiration, a thrill mixed with disappointment, because I realized then, that what a chunk had gone. And I was probably had mixed feelings about my own personal involvement, but certainly the film itself was mind-blowing. And when I got reports from Hollywood, when it was just first being shown over there, my friend said, "Get over here quick. It doesn't matter. You're in there and you're with one of the, what's bound to be one of the biggest films, certainly of the year and perhaps of all time. Who knows?" But I didn't. And it then just became another film. And the same way with the script. When I was first got the script, I remember taking it to the BBC when I was working at the BBC in that play that I said, and I thought, he said, I don't know really what's going on in this script, but there it is. I'm going off tomorrow or the next day to Tunisia, and we'll see what happens. I didn't, and when I got there, there was a kind of feeling we didn't really know how gigantic it was. It was a set, a job. And I think there was a bit of skepticism from some members of the crew. They didn't quite know what it would look like in the end. No, it was a job, and it looked exciting, and it certainly was exciting when we got on the set, just to be there. It's very hard to remember your initial feelings when you look back on your first days on a film. It always has an excitement, no matter what film you're working on. It has an excitement, and you hope for the best. I remember when we were going back, I was talking to, maybe it was Alec Guinness's wife, saying, I said, I've done 3 films. I think this is the 3rd major film I've been involved with. I hope it's a success. And we're all hoping it will be too. Yeah.
I think, because a lot of people are obviously very fixed on your role in Star Wars, but I've read up on the films that you've been in. I've seen you in many things as far-reaching as that spy game, and also Doctor Who and things like that. What are the other things that make you most proud in your career? Do you think is that a difficult question for a humble man like yourself to answer?
Well, I mean, I'm proud of most of the things. Just whatever I do, I try and do my best. But the very first film has that great big impact, and that was I was doing 2 films, but I was starring in a film that got lost, but just disappeared, called Some Kind of Hero, which was great to lead a film and to play a Vietnam deserter. It was, to me, a very exciting time just to lead the company and do that film. But at the same time, along came Charlton Heston with his offer to do Antony and Cleopatra. So that I put, I asked the film that I was Some Kind of Hero director if I could go away and work with Charlton Heston for a couple of weeks. And he held his film, Some Kind of Hero, so that I could go and work with Charlton Heston in Spain, in Almeria, on Antony and Cleopatra. And to work with Heston and a company of fantastic English actors, including Julian Glover, who became a friend, who, of course, I meet up with again in Star Wars. But to work with Heston on Antony, a great Shakespearean script with wonderful actors, was a tremendous initiation for me. And Heston gave me every bit of screen time, advice, help, and encouragement, etc., that he could have. So that was a great beginning for me. And then to have the opportunity to work with wonderful directors like Richard Attenborough and Tony Scott and on, and Tim Burton, Richard Linklater, they're all exciting. I've been very privileged. And Paul Verhoeven, all these experiences, I haven't played major parts in a lot of these films, but every film has been an education and an excitement, a tremendous, I feel, a variety of stuff. And I look back, I right from I think the very first film I did, I was in high school. Yeah. And I did a Western in the frozen wastes of northern Ontario in a shack that was so cold we kept the horses in the shack with us. with an act, Lindsay Shontath. It was a B-budget, C-budget film. But there I was getting killed again. I got killed again as a young kid on a farm, being beaten up by these Western thugs. But I have a lot of films that have added to this rich tapestry.
Have you ever thought about writing a book about your experiences or memoir?
Well, people ask me that. I should have, because an old critic friend of mine said, don't write about yourself. I did this and then I did this and then. Write about being on these kind of epic changes. I was in very early stages in television. I had a very early radio show when I was 11 years old. I took over from a Canadian young man called Peter Jennings, who became ABC anchor in New York, and a very famous anchor man he was. And I took over from him at the age of 11 and had a radio show in Canada. But then I was in on early television in Toronto. Then I was in the film I keep talking about, The Message, in Morocco and Libya for 13 months, which was an incredible, at that time, before terrorism and took over, it was a great binding, unifying force between the Arab world. It was the story of Muhammad as told as well as we could tell it. So the director and producer, gathered 26 different nationalities, terrific actors, and crew from all over the Arab world and the English world, led by Anthony Quinn, and Irene Pappas. And I was on film in a huge family of, I can't tell you, maybe 150 altogether, filming these gigantic epics. One, we did the message in Arabic and in English. I played the English, obviously. So that was an incredible experience, not to be repeated. I don't think it's ever been done since, to have 2 big films, 4-hour films in 2 different languages, classical Arabic and English. And then to be one of the early actors in the Chinese movie. I did a Chinese epic called The Opium War. And that was a great experience, working with a famous Chinese director called Xie Xin. And when they talk about film, I noticed this huge documentary on 100 famous films. And gosh, I'm connected with 3 or 4 of them, which is a great privilege.
That's fantastic. You've certainly given me a list of films to watch there. I've not seen The Message or The Opium War.
Well, you have to be dedicated to watch, because most of the Muslims that I've encountered have seen one or either the Arabic or the English version. So if I say I played Ammar, a lot of them respond favorably. Their eyes light up, and indeed, and I just, having spent so much time in the desert learning Arabic with the Bedouins who were, or the Berbers who were extras sitting there, riding my horse and working with Quinn and so on, was terrific. Absolutely.
And you returned to Tunisia, didn't you, in 2002 with Gary Kurtz and Jason Joy?
Yes, we did. Gary Kurtz did an interview with me at the little mosque at Mata, where we shot the deleted scene, the famous deleted scene. So yes, Gary and I have done that. I've never seen the footage from that film, and presumably it's sitting somewhere, perhaps to be released in the future, because it contains interviews with a lot of the people involved with the film who aren't perhaps normally interviewed, and some of them passed on, of course. So it's sitting there waiting perhaps to be released at some point.
Yeah, it'd be nice to see that. I did see some footage actually that has sort of been dug up from somewhere of you and Mark and Marcia Lucas and George Lucas on the set back in '76 in Tunisia on that big scene of yours that I'd never seen before. And you're talking to somebody here who's trawled every corner of the galaxy, as it were, to find these things.
I saw a clip of that. Somebody sent to me, but in fact, you can't hear what we're saying, and I'm not a good enough lip reader. And I thought his head is down anyway. I'd love to be able to lip read and see what instructions we're getting from George. We all look pretty intense, and then delightful Marcia comes on with a great big smile. Delightful. But we don't know what we're saying. It would be very interesting to know.
Yeah, I should get a lip reading expert on the case then. 2 final questions. Obviously, you've had a number of action figures made of yourself.
Yes.
That must be. Do you own any? And is it a bit of a surreal experience?
Well, it's not surreal. It's very material, if you like. I'm signing these things endlessly, and I enjoy it. And not so much. I haven't seen the big box with Wedge and I. Not too many of those, but certainly there's the smaller models and the Black series that's come out. All fun design, and then they brought out the my costume from the deleted scene, which was even more dramatic because it's really a lovely kind of dashing costume, and so I'm lucky. Yeah, I've got quite a run of figures. They keep. I'm opening Legoland in Denmark, along with a Lego huge, I think the biggest at the end of this month. Right. So I hope that Lego will also have models, little Lego Biggs too. I think I've had a little keyring Lego, but somebody painted a mustache. I think it was Luke, and they painted a mustache and called it Biggs.
You like those? It's quite a dashing costume.
Figures have been terrific to sign, and people love them.
No, it is a great costume. I think you're probably, I was trying to think, you're one of 3 characters that has a cape. You know, there's Lando Calrissian, Darth Vader, and yourself, I think. So it's...
Well, exactly. And Mark, and I think that's one of the things that we did talk about with George in the very first meeting with George, the cake business, because indeed in Morocco we wore capes because, and so did all the Berbers, as protection. And they may look hot, but on the other hand, they protect you from the sun. They're very good.
One final thing then, Garrick. So you've had obviously great success with your audiobooks and your production company, and you've directed many audiobooks. Is that something that you started, or when did you start that work? And is it something that you continue to do and enjoy now?
Well, the audio work developed out of most of the vocal work that I was doing in London. We started a company, my friend Bill Dufries and I, to produce little dramas, because I'd been trained in radio drama in Toronto, which was a hotbed of good radio drama, and I'd been trained as a kid from the early ages. My early radio experience was a doorway to Fairyland, and Fairyland at that time had a very nice connotation. We would go into a fairyland of adventure, and we would do a show every Saturday morning, take off our shoes so we wouldn't make a noise in the studio, and then the young actors would do a play for half an hour every Saturday morning for 5 or 6 months. And that was great training. So that stayed with me. And so when I started this company about 15 years ago, called The Story Circle, with my friend Bill Dufries, we were doing little dramas in the studio that we adapted from what they called the point horror stories. I went on into other series, and as a result of these little dramas that we scripted and did with sound effects and music, and they were very good and for Scholastic, I then got Philip Pullman's commission to do Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials, and that put us on a different level, because I worked with Philip and I had a huge cast of about 30 actors who played all the parts, and Philip narrated. So that was a great experience in audio, and set our company, onto a different level. And now I have worked with most of the major publishers producing for them, mainly single reads, but sometimes double reads, sometimes more. And I really enjoyed directing. I've worked with wonderful actors like Ian McKellen and all the way down. I've worked with terrific voice artists directing them, and most of them seem to appreciate direction. I certainly enjoy it, and I've learned to edit the productions. So it's all just flowed. The Story Circle has done about 190 productions, and I'm now preparing for tomorrow. I'm working with Mark Billiam, a wonderful author, on reading his own. I've worked with Earl Spencer, Princess Diana's brother, on his book, and so many others. Oh, Joan Collins, Leslie Phillips. I've had the privilege of meeting these actors that I probably wouldn't have worked with in the normal course of events. So that has been a great filler of my time when I'm not acting. I've been able to do this, and I've enjoyed the combination of being able to act, being able to be a voice artist myself, read books, and direct others, and enhance readings if I can by directing and editing properly. A lot of our stories have won awards. I've just been working with an actor called Nicholas Bolton, who's terrific, and he has won 5 earphones just in the last year on books we've been doing. So no, really, it's been terrific. I've done all of Alexander McCall Smith, or most of them, Marva Motsway stories. That has been a great part of my life here, and I've enjoyed every minute of it.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it sounds very, it's very worthwhile and enriching work, and I think it means a lot to a lot of people. So, thanks.
Yes, I hope so. I hope so. But there's a limited audience, sure, but it's an expanding field in itself. We just had a huge meeting of all the audiobook people in London, practically, and And the figures of the rate at which audiobooks are becoming popular and selling is quite phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, myself, I do listen to audiobooks quite a lot because I fly a lot for my job. I work on Formula One Grand Prix, and so I'm off to Melbourne in a couple of weeks and in Malaysia. So because I'm an editor as well, I'm working with screens all day. So the last thing I want to do is look at fine print in a book, because I want to keep my sight. So I listen to a lot of audiobooks on planes, and I've definitely listened to your voice through the night on a long haul flight, and it's a really enjoyable way to experience.
Well, that's great. I'm all for it. Keep listening.
And I think, you're right. There's probably a huge comeback for audiobooks, given that, everybody's now got a phone that's capable of doing it.
Yes.
No, I wish you all the best with the future of that. Well, listen, it's been great talking to you, Garrick. I really do appreciate you taking some time out and helping me for my little projects.
All the best to you.
Thank you, and to you. Take care.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my archival chat there with Garrick Hagon. Very much a proto version of the podcast from back in 2015. Some of my first interviews were with him and Wolf Carler and Toby Phlipott. I've got some very interesting guests coming up on the podcast, but I'm not sure in what order yet, so I'm going to leave that hanging for now. But rest assured, there's plenty on the way. Remember to check out Patreon, the t-shirt shop, the Etsy shop, and the YouTube channel. Hitting subscribe while you do. Please also tell your friends about this podcast, and please also leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It will really help in getting this to more ears. I think my listenership has kind of hit a ceiling at the moment. I'm sure there's more people that would love to listen to it, so I'd really appreciate you just spreading the word. I don't have a marketing budget. I barely have a budget. So your help is very, very gratefully received. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you can do so for the next episode of the Filmumentaries podcast.